The divisional round of the NFL playoffs is just around the corner, and oh, buddy, we got some fun games and some fun DFS plays to discuss. We're going to break down all four games here and let you know which players we are targeting for daily fantasy across the Saturday-only slate, the Sunday-only slate, the Saturday to Sunday slate. Break it all down and get you ready to hopefully win some money this week over on FanDuel. This is the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network at numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. All right.
You doing all right?
I give up. So we have this show live on YouTube, and typically how it works is I will start the intro song first before we go live and then press go live so that the intro is already rolling when we go on. I forgot to press the intro song today because for covering the spread, I do go live first, then the intro song to try to mesh them up really well. For this one, I don't. It doesn't matter when the intro starts. So there is I'm going to ask them to scrub this, but there is on the YouTube version currently, the first second is me and Brandon what just happened facing. So we're off to a blazing start. This is the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, not covering the spread. I am Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire. That's Brandon Gdula. He is the senior managing editor of numberFire.com. I think, Brandon, can you confirm that most of those facts are at least somewhat true?
I think it's based in reality. Yeah, I think that's good. And we don't need to scrub. It's like the Marvel end credits just at the beginning, a little bit extra.
But okay, so I embed the YouTube video on numberFire's site. I'll embed it in the post. Usually I will skip to the timestamp where the intro ends and we come on. Mm-hmm. Do I not do that this time? So people press play on numberFire and see our shocked faces immediately when it rolls.
I think that'd be good.
Is this just a long con to force people to watch the YouTube version instead of listening to the audio version? Is this just a way to juice our YouTube numbers?
Look, man, only you could know. All I know is I was still seeing our faces, and I saw the red live box that comes up in the thing that we use to record stuff. And I was like, maybe I'm confused, because I don't run stuff, but then when I saw your confusion, I realized what happened. So
yeah. So you can actually, if you're watching YouTube, you can go back to that point and you can see me staring down. Brandon looks frightened and is staring directly at the screen. And then then the intro rolls. So you don't see my shock because my shock went away or didn't occur until after the intro thing was rolling. But if you want a little Easter egg, that will hopefully be gone later on and is not relevant to any of you anymore. Maybe I'll screen cap it and tweet it out before we scrub it from the plane of existence.
What percent of people do you think are just skipping ahead to when we're talking about the slate?
Yeah, I mean, I do skip ahead in podcasts at times. So that 15-second burst on Spotify, I don't blame them. So anyway, we're going to break down all four games for the divisional round, let you know where we are seeing value on FanDuel across each slate, let you know our priority plays, aka Christian McCaffrey, and get you set for this weekend. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Said the right one this time. Wherever you get your podcast, because we have the Daily ISO every weekday with Tom Vecchio, PGA DFS podcasts every Tuesday as well. We have these NFL podcasts through the Super Bowl, UFC for Big Slates with Austin Swaim, all in this same feed. So go search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. The 2022 NFL season is winding down, and FanDuel and GMC continue to bring you the GMC Sierra Mountain Climber Pick'em, a free-to-play contest series that gives you a chance to win a share of $10,000 in FanDuel site credit every week, courtesy of GMC. Here's how it works. Every week during the NFL season, you'll have a chance to answer questions around that week's games. The more questions you answer correctly, the higher up the mountain you will move. If during any week You answer every question correctly for a perfect score. You will reach the summit and win your share of $10,000 in site credit. The contest series is now live. Sign to FanDuel.com/free/contest/GMC today and start climbing that mountain. FanDuel.com/free/contest/GMC for the GMC Sierra Mountain Climber Mountain Climber Pick'em. Brandon, you for this divisional round. I give up. What is your slate overview here for the divisional round?
For like the 4-game slate?
What is the biggest key to you, whether it be for the 4-game slate, either 2-game slates?
Biggest key for me is scoring points, baby.
Okay, choose your own adventure. I'm going to let you guide the podcast from here on out.
Scoring points, but more helpfully, these are both 2-game slates, as we know, and we have the 4-game slate. But figuring out where you are willing to divest from the most obvious plays.
Mm-hmm.
There are, especially on the Saturday slate, there are pretty obvious core level plays that stand out from a process standpoint, just above everybody else. Travis Kelce is in a lot of the optimizers. You see Travis Etienne, so you get the Travis stack. Darius Slayton as well in a lot of optimizers. So like those are all really good process plays, and we're going to talk about why we like them too. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but presumably you like all 3 of those plays.
Yeah.
There are a few more, but to what degree are you willing to differentiate from the most obvious path in order to try to get a leg up in terms of, playing in tournaments? If you're just doing like head-to-head competitions, with your friends or against other people, that's different. But we always sort of take a modified approach where like we talk about the best process plays, but then spin that in terms of how we can differentiate. We're going to get a lot of that on the Sunday slate as well, with Josh Allen specifically. Like he pops as in all the optimizers, makes a ton of sense from a process standpoint, but like to what degree are you willing to differentiate? And I think you just ask yourself, how willing am I to be, to go against the grain? I think that's the main takeaway for me.
It's very similar for me, except instead of going against the grain, it's going against projections, because projections serve a lot of value. And for the most part, they are very good. And as a result of that, people will follow projections, because I think the public is pretty good in 2023 at playing DFS, and they know projections have a lot of value. So the key is identifying players and situations that projections may not encapsulate fully. So to me, that means which guys are undersold by projections, basically. And that list is Christian McCaffrey, Tony Pollard, Kadarius Toney. I think that those 3 guys specifically have roles that are difficult to project, because if you project them the way they've been used recently, they're not going to pop as much. Like McCaffrey, you were showing me 4 separate sites for optimals. McCaffrey was in 2 because he's very good. And, I think that he was in 2 out of those 4, but like, I think he should be in 4 out of 4 because his role is hard to project, but the production in his most relevant sample is through the roof. And Kadarius Toney, you're kind of making an assumption that the Chiefs kept him in bubble wrap for the postseason. I think that's a very fair assumption. And honestly, probably what I would have done if I were in their shoes. So I bake in a roll projection or a roll bump up for him, but it's hard to project. Same thing for Tony Pollard. Had his highest snap rate on Monday night that he's had in a game with Zeke Elliott active this entire year. And might have been masked by the score a little bit. His first half snap rate was not super high either. So I think it kind of flew a bit under the radar. So I think that those 3 guys are players who will be undersold by baseline projections, and as a result, may not be rostered as heavily as I think they should based on their upside and potential. Is it risky? Yeah, because betting against projections is typically a losing bet. They're very good, but I think that with those guys specifically, knowing what their upside is, should they get bigger roles, I think I'm willing to do that. So it does require some risk. It does require some arrogance to assume you can beat projections on my part.
No, it's not arrogance. It's understanding, and this is a big part of like what I do. when I look at everything, is projections are good. You can go through and build your own projections, but if you do that, you are either spinning your wheels because you're trying to recreate like a combination of what's already out there,
Yeah.
or you're like way off consensus. And if consensus says one thing and you're way off, that's either really good or really bad.
Right.
So what matters more is looking at consensus projections and understanding what a range of outcomes looks like from there. And so, Josh Allen's going to have a higher projection. What does that mean in terms of how likely he is to reach certain thresholds, that kind of stuff? And that's like not everyone. You don't have to have that. Like if you don't do that yourself, it's not like that you're fine. Just think about, just because someone's projected for 5 more points does not mean that they will score 5 more points. We all know that, but it can be a little bit scary to go against that, especially on a small slate, because it feels like you're just building bad lineups otherwise. But that's not necessarily the case if you're looking at the right data.
I think I'd rephrase it as having confidence in your ability to diagnose fluid situations. And I think that that's something that I can do. Am I right? Not always. No, I get things wrong all the time. But I think that we need to find ways to do that for this slate. So let's start things off here by talking about the Jaguars at the Chiefs. This is still at 8.5 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. It looks like it's going to get to 9 probably pretty soon, potentially even bigger than that. So 8.5 for now. Chiefs favored over the Jags. Total in this game is 52.5. Injuries here all on the Chiefs side. Mecole Hardman seems unlikely to play after missing practice both Tuesday and Wednesday. Sky Moore should be back for whatever Sky Moore's role will be in the postseason. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was designated to return. He has not been activated yet. And we also don't know if he'll be activated before the game. And we also don't know if he'll have a role if he is active for this one. I'm kind of assuming no, based on the role he had before his injury. So I'm not super concerned about CEH returning here for the Chiefs in terms of how he impacts Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco. So Brandon, when you look at this game, Jags at Chiefs, what are you seeing here as being the overriding thought?
What we're doing with Travis Kelce. He is in all the optimal lineups that I'm seeing. I understand the case for it, because if Travis Kelce has a Travis Kelce game and you do not have Travis Kelce exposure, I'm not saying you're toast, but it's going to be really hard to overcome that. But I think you can also make that case with a Saquon Barkley relative to the other running backs on the slate. Maybe like AJ Brown relative to the other receivers in terms of what his true ceiling is, but then also the 2 quarterbacks with Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts compared to Lawrence and Daniel Jones. So I think everything starts in this game with how we're handling Travis Kelce, and that doesn't have to be you're either playing him or not, and there's no in between. There's probably going to be in between for virtually everyone, but is he someone you're like locking in, or is he someone you're prioritizing at the expense of one of the 2 quarterbacks, the expense of Saquon Barkley? Where are you with Travis Kelce? That's where I think this game starts.
Well, I think that you can get into Mahomes Kelce stack. I don't think you can. I tried to do Mahomes Kelce Saquon, and it was really tough. So the question is, would you rather go Mahomes Kelce, or I guess Hurts Kelce? Either way, because they're basically the same salary, or would you rather get Saquon in there? And looking at the way the slate breaks down, I think you can make a strong case for going Saquon plus Goddard, but I'd want that to be in a Hurts lineup because it implies that game is higher scoring. So I feel like, to me, Kelce is like not someone I must have locked in, but if you give me one lineup, he's probably gonna be in there.
Okay.
One lineup for this Saturday only slate, I should specify. I do think that Goddard is intriguing. I do think that Evan Ingram is worthwhile as well. So you have other routes you can go, but I think if I have one lineup, Travis Kelce is decently likely. He's a favorite. He's like, minus 150 to be in it, I would say.
So then presumably Saquon Barkley will not be in your single lineup on a Saturday then.
I don't think I can get both. So yeah, I'd prioritize Kelsey over Saquon by a smidge.
That's interesting to me, especially coming from you.
Yeah.
So like, there's a lot of different samples to look at for the Chiefs, and we'll probably differ. But like since week 16 with like Tony back to some degree, Travis Kelce's target share is 27.5%, but his red zone target share is only 11.8%. The red zone share for Kelce's been the real concern because we know that he has true yardage upside, and we know that he can have touchdowns from outside the red zone, big plays, but the probability of a multi-touchdown game from him seems to be down. And I think that, yeah, if he gets us a Travis Kelce, like 27-point game, very much worth it. If at 8,000, there's not a whole lot of room for error for him to be just fine and get you like 15.6. Even if every other tight end gets you like 8, that's not like a huge enough gap necessarily. So I think the restrictions of what he does to cap the rest of the lineup is substantial enough where I don't think I would get to him in a single entry lineup, or not a single entry, but like my main, if I'm building one lineup for the day, I think I'd probably go to Saquon.
Okay. And I think that's fair. I think the reason why I gravitate towards Kelsey is this is actually a spot where I do think the projections are handling things correctly, is a tight end. Looking at the 4-game slate, Kelsey's yardage projection is about 30 yards higher than every single tight end. Touchdown projection is in line with Dallas Goedert. But like, I don't care personally about the red zone role in that span because he's had 2 separate 3 touchdown games this year. I know that like logically Travis Kelce can get a lot of red zone work. So although he didn't get it in that span, I think that I wouldn't project him to have a lower red zone role going forward. So Kelsey, I think is I think he's worth prioritizing. Part of it also is I'm a little bit lower on Saquon maybe than other stuff maybe, just because I respect the Eagles a lot. I respect the Eagles defense a lot. I love Saquon, but his salary at $8,500 is very high. I think the question that the way I'd phrase it is this: is which position sucks more? Do you think running back sucks more or tight end? I think that's the most compelling argument for using Saquon. Is I think that running back on the Saturday only slate kind of sucks outside of ETN. Mm-hmm. So I think that that'd be a good pitch for using Saquon, is that it means you don't have to force in Miles Sanders, Jarek, Pacheco in that second running back slot. I think that's a good pitch for going Saquon. It probably, to me, would be the most convincing argument for using Saquon over Kelsey.
Yeah, I think the opportunity cost is pretty large there. Mm-hmm. I like Dallas Goedert. We can talk about him once we get to that game in a little bit more detail. I like Evan Ingram, which we can talk about here anytime we want. But I think that those are both viable plays. And I know it's scary to be like low on Kelsey. That's why I'm not saying, oh, I'm fading Kelsey. Like I don't like him. It's just we gotta be pragmatic, and we can't say we love Jalen Hurts and Mahomes. Yeah. We love Saquon. We love Kelsey. Let's get all of them in there. Doesn't really work unless you're just playing the bottom barrel value plays everywhere else. And maybe that's the optimal. Like maybe that's how it works out. But I don't necessarily think that that's the right way to go unless you're making the case that like, okay, Jalen Hurts maybe still not 100%. AJ Brown's not going to have a big game. Christian Kirk, like they're going to spread the ball around enough where Kirk's not going to be great. So the actual difference makers will be, one of the two quarterbacks or not. But like Saquon and like maybe Kelsey is like, so like we talk, especially in the playoffs with smaller slates, telling yourself the narrative, figuring out how you think things will go. If you don't see a big game coming from like AJ Brown, if you talk yourself into like if you're more like Jim and say that Saquon's going to get a little bit limited, then yeah, that's the case to be higher on Kelsey. So I guess like none of this is like earth shattering, but it's important to like think about why you are or are not super high on someone.
Yeah, and I think that talking through the fact that running back is difficult, that's moved my Kelsey in my one lineup from -150, I would say, to -130, -125, somewhere in there. So still more likely, but that's I think a compelling argument for not going with him.
What about the other Chiefs pass catchers here?
So let's talk about a couple of potential really fun value plays in this game. And those to me are Travis Etienne and Kadarius Toney. ETN comes in at $6,800. ETN's role in that wild card comeback, very good, 90% snap rate in that one. Good yardage. And in the games, he's had a full games he's played as a feature back, 97.2 yards in scrimmage per game. For $6,800, you take that every time. Chiefs rush defense, not that good, despite Chris Jones being a phenomenal defensive player. As far as Kadarius Toney, again, it comes back to assuming that his role increases. And I think that will happen here because he is the most talented non-Mahomes player on this team right now. His salary comes in at $5,800 or $5,700, somewhere in there.
Toney,
and 58. And we've seen him, when he's been on the field, get a lot of work, whether it be as a runner or a pass catcher. So that's what allows me to feel good about getting to at least one of Saquon or Kelsey, is knowing that I have, I think, two tremendous value plays in this game, and ETN and Kadarius Toney. Where do you come in on those two guys specifically?
Yeah, I mean, ETN. So I guess one of the things that I probably should have said as my slate overview instead was like how heavily we're weighting the wild card round for teams that did play in the wild card round. And for me, it's very, very heavily to the point that I basically just pulled up what they did last week because there's no reason to save anyone. You're not like trying to figure out, this and that. But ETN, yeah, you already mentioned the 90% snap rate, 20 carries, the receiving role, not really what you want it to be. One target for 12 yards, but he did run 29 routes. And as someone who was invested in his rushing prop, I noticed a lot of swing passes that may as well have been targets. So, a little bit nicer there to know that he's getting like some extended handoffs, however you want to phrase that. So ETN at 68, understandably, the optimizers like him at the low salary, but I don't even know if that's necessarily like high enough, because a 90% snap rate at a sub 7,000 salary would get us going crazy on a full slate, but on a 2-game slate, promising rushing matchup, ETN going to be someone I lock in. I don't think that it's not nearly as high of a variance position as tight end with like Travis Kelce. So if I'm locking in one player on the 2-game slate on Saturday, it's going to be Travis Etienne. With Toney, yeah, it's a bet on a role shift or a role increase. I was actually trying to pull up his opportunity per snap rate with the team, just because I think that's kind of an underutilized number overall, but he is at, where are you at, Kadarius? 21.1%. That's
like Tyreek.
That's basically pretty high. Yeah. Kelsey's at like 18%. Juju's at 13.7%. So he's getting like a carrier target on, 1 out of every 5 snaps. So
I was listening to slight aside. I was listening to the Athletic Football Show last week, and Nate Tice was talking about how Jamal Agnew in that stat is at like 30%. So like he plays like 10 snaps a game, but when he's out there, he's probably getting the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there are just some players like that. Isaiah Pacheco has a pretty high rate as well. He's at 52% since week 7. So like, these are, you could maybe nitpick the role itself in terms of like snaps, but there are differences in terms of certain players. And I think that even if Toney doesn't get an 85% snap rate, which he's not going to, we're going to see him get carries. We're going to see him get...
I don't know that he won't, to be fully honest.
I don't think we'll get quite there. I think that they'll still run out Marquez Valdes-Scantling just to run down the field a lot. But
I think there's a legit chance if he gets an every down role, his salary should be 73 and he's 58. If his role stays the same, he should be about 56, 55. Yeah. So it should be lower if he stays the same, but I think that there is a very real chance and a lot of upside if he gets any role shift at all.
Yeah. So I said I'm locking in ETN and just not going to worry about it, because pivoting away from that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me unless you go the case of, well, they're going to get blown out from the start. Well, guess what? They were blown out from the start last game. He played 90% of the snaps. I know the targets weren't there, but again, like those swing passes were there. So how high would you be on Toney in terms of like your own exposure rate?
It's gonna flirt with 100.
Yeah,
it might not get there because I might actively be like, okay, duplicate this lineup, put Marvin Jones in or whatever, because I assume Darius Slayton will already be in there. Put in Marvin Jones, someone else, just differentiate.
Yeah.
So Tony will be flirting with 100, I think.
The downside of going 100% on a value play goes down because you're not really, if you go 100% Travis Kelce and he gets you 12 points,
right,
that's hard to overcome. If Tony gets us 4 on a 2-game slate,
is someone else replacing that in the same range?
Yeah. So as long as you're using that salary to roster guys with upside, then yeah.
Correct. That's where I'm at. Am I too high on him, or where are you on Tony specifically?
You're higher on him than I am. I would not put him in like the 73 range.
If he had a full roll?
Well, okay, but like we're taking if a lot of players had a full 90% snap rate roll, then they would be seeing substantial jumps. I don't know if I can really project that.
But like he'd have a better projection than Juju, who has a full roll, and he's like 66.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the guiding light I use.
I think the hang up for me is I can't just like inject an every down roll for Tony.
I can
on a
in
team
my head.
Team that uses literally like 7 tight ends just to rotate in guys and
yeah, but
like
you can't keep Noah Gray off the field. Noah Gray's amazing. This is not sarcasm, by the way. I love Noah Gray.
I know. So we got to.
I just want to make that clear. I love him.
We got to talk Chiefs running backs, and we got to talk Jaguars pass catchers.
Talk me through Chiefs running backs right now.
So I've initially just pulled up a sample like since week 13 with like Juju healthy because he's sort of a big part of the offense, but
he's the third running back.
Since then, like Jerick McKinnon's at over 18 FanDuel points per game because he's scoring a ton, especially through the air. But he's at a 35% opportunity per snap rate, and that's in that split. Isaiah Pacheco is like not almost doubled, but like he's at 55%.
LeGarrette Pacheco,
like that's crazy. I actually have Pacheco with a better expected FanDuel points per game output than Jerick McKinnon. That being said, I really do like Jerick. He gets a lot of high leverage looks. He gets receptions, which we know add up. Basically, one target is worth about 2 carries in terms of expected FanDuel points. He has a great red zone role. That itself is what lowers me on Pacheco, because I'd say like, oh, well, I'll rotate, I'll pivot down to Pacheco because the role is still good for a 2-game slate, but I can't guarantee that he won't just be pulled off the field inside the 20. And if he isn't and he scores, he's going to be like a strong play at his salary. But I'm high on McKinnon specifically because of the red zone role.
Sure.
And I don't think that's going to go away.
Yeah, I think for me, if I play things straight and assume they keep their same roles, Pacheco is a better play. I have 8 games with CEH either out or limited. I omitted week 18 because they mixed in Rojo more there, and I don't think they'll do that here. But in those games, Pacheco 85.8 yards from scrimmage per game, McKinnon 64.8. Red zone for Pacheco 28.2% red zone share, McKinnon 23.5. So edges for Pacheco in both. The reason I can't say Pacheco is definitely 1, McKinnon definitely 2 is I think the matchup is better for McKinnon because the Jags are good against the rush. Now you look back to their first game against the Jags, Pacheco played a lot, but I think that was a game where they got up pretty big, pretty early and were able to control things. That might happen again. But I don't think we'll see a foot off the gas Chiefs team. Foot on the gas to me implies more McKinnon. So I would say they are truly dead even is my assumption going into this game. So I'll probably have a pretty equal share of both, honestly. And that sounds wishy-washy, but I think that's the way I want to play things here.
So the Jaguars allow the highest target per route rate to running backs in the NFL. They have not yet allowed a receiving touchdown, according to my data, but I don't care about that.
Right.
So we can see a lot of McKinnon out of the backfield and, 6-7 targets, couple carries, red zone looks. Like I have McKinnon over Pacheco, but I do like both.
10 lineups between the two of them. I have 5-5. What do you have?
Maybe 6-4 with Jerick.
I agree with that. Okay, let's talk about the Jags pass catchers then. And also, if you think Trevor Lawrence is in play, I do want to hear that as well. The Jags pass catchers last week, a lot of volume because they were down 27-0. So obviously the actual like numbers in that game are going to be pretty wild. But in the 15 games they played with both Joneses active, Christian Kirk, 24% target share, Zay Jones, 23%. Both those guys have a 27% red zone share in that sample. Kirk has a 31% deep share, Zay Jones 22%, Marvin Jones 31%. So I think that Marv on the 2-game slate more specifically is viable at 53. Not someone I want to get to, but if it makes it easier to get to other guys, fine. I can live with that. He's well below both Tony and Darius Slayton for me, though. But he's viable. I think that Zay at 65 continues to be a tremendous option. Kirk at 76, I prefer Devontae Smith over him and AJ Brown. So to me, relative to salary, relative to expected exposure, I'd probably go Zay 1, Evan Ingram 2, Marv 3, Christian Kirk 4, and I might wind up not having Christian Kirk. Where are you on them, and will you use Trevor Lawrence?
I'm pretty similar. I don't know if I'll get to Lawrence. I don't know if I think I'd be lowest on. I might be lower on Lawrence than any other quarterback on the slate, but
yeah, with Jones rushing, I think that's probably where I'd be too.
But specifically last week, boy, they really concentrated things. I know that I won't say that like the target numbers, but Kirk had a 30% target share, Zay Jones 28, Ingram 24, Marv 13, but Marv ran 90% of the routes. Only so basically it was Ingram at 88%, and then the 3 receivers, Marvin Jones, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, had a higher route rate than that. Travis Etienne 59%, and then basically nobody else ran any routes. So like that's at least concentrated. With the Chiefs, it can be hard to pick the right stacking partner. I know that we're like high on Tony. It's not like Juju Smith-Schuster is going away, but I think his role is a little bit overrated right now for the salary. I don't think that like the expectations are quite there, but it's going to be really easy to bring back Jaguars with those 4 pass catchers with ETN. I think I'd rank them the same as you, and I'd probably just be lowest on Kirk because I can get similar numbers like from Zay Jones.
Yeah.
I know that like popularity and leverage comes into play, but I think that probably no Lawrence. I can't play them. I can't play all the quarterbacks. I think it's a bad long-term play in terms of expected value, but pretty fun team in terms of how they concentrate things to their 5 skill position players right now.
I fully agree. Any final thoughts for you on this game before we move to Giants Eagles?
No, I think we talked about everything and we gave some context into the 2-game slate as a whole. So
yeah, some of this has already been discussed. But let's move now to the Giants at the Eagles, where right now the Eagles are 7.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 48.5. I think both those are appropriate based on what my numbers have. I actually think I have the total at 49. It's actually a tiny bit higher and the spread a bit tighter. So this game is actually not that bad for stacking, which might have been part of why I was talking about Jalen Hurts being up there at Mahomes for this slate. Hurts practicing in full, not on the injury report for this week at all. That's awesome. Lane Johnson limited in practice for 2 days. That's a good thing because he should return following a 2-game absence. Isaiah Hodgins has been limited in practice both days this week with an ankle injury. He should be good to go though. So full health across the board. You got to love that. So Brandon, what are you seeing here with the Giants at the Eagles?
Yeah, I think we got to figure out how Jalen Hurts stacks up compared to Mahomes and really solidify the QB1, the person that we're more in on. It could be 50-50, but I don't know if that really helps because then you're just kind of limiting the chance that you hit the right stack. So it might need to take a little bit of a stand with like Mahomes and then Kelsey/Tony or Hurts and then his pass catchers.
Let's have the quarterback discussion right now then. I think Jalen Hurts has a slight edge over Patrick Mahomes in terms of top quarterback on this slate because I just love the rushing so much. And I have decently high expectations for the passing in terms of at least efficiency. The Giants played tremendously last week. Their offense is very fun. Their defense is still not very good. And I like that setup for Jalen Hurts. Hurts, we know he's been used towards the goal line. In week 18, they didn't run him, but they didn't have to because they were 14-point favorites and, just wanted to make sure he didn't make that injury worse heading into the postseason. So to me, I would give Jalen Hurts a slight edge over Mahomes for the QB1 in the slate. I think both these guys are in a tier of their own above Daniel Jones. How do you view Hurts versus Mahomes?
I think I'm with you. I think I have Hurts a tick above. Could be a little bit silly, but he's a lot easier to stack. So if he goes, if he has a big game, I think I have a better chance of hitting the right stack candidate with him because it's a little bit more concentrated, and it also is a natural way to pivot away from Kelsey because Dallas Goedert would be a lot more viable if we're banking on a bigger game from Jalen Hurts. Best tight end matchup of the slate belongs to, actually the whole weekend belongs to Dallas Goedert. I like that. So for that reason, I have Hurts a bit above, and it helps me again, like pivot away from Kelsey without being careless.
Is Dallas Goedert your favorite stacking partner with Jalen Hurts this weekend?
I think he is because of how everything else shakes out.
I agree.
So that's
and I don't think that's a bad thing personally, because Goddard has had a good role. The sample I have on them is 10 games with Goddard healthy, with Hurts healthy as well. In those games, Goddard 5.8 targets per game, 0.5 deep targets, 0.9 red zone targets. Devontae Smith 6.9 overall targets per game, 0.8 deep targets, 0.7 in the red zone. AJ Brown 8.4 total targets, 1.9 deep. So he looks pretty good in this split. AJ Brown does, but his salary also reflects that. So Goddard coming in at a salary of 63. I also think we'll probably see him be a bit under rostered here, given that Ingram had another very good game last week, has a lower salary, given that Kelsey is here as well. So I think that Goddard grades out very well. Best stacking partner with Hurts. And honestly, the further we get into this, the more I talk myself into prioritizing Saquon over Travis Kelsey as a result of my allure, or the allure of Jalen Hurts and Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, I think Goddard is the real key to all this. Ingram too, but a little bit lower on him because of the offensive expectations. But at that same 10-game split, AJ Brown at 2.82 yards per route run in that span. Goddard's at 2.2, which is great. Devontae Smith 1.75, and it's not like to say that I don't like Devontae Smith, but it kind of just goes to show how good Dallas Goedert is. And then the role is still strong. So with that matchup being what it is, I think that Dallas Goedert makes a lot of sense for this week. So I'm in on Goddard, and that's why I think I'm higher on Saquon, which kind of then in turn puts me pretty high on this game compared to the first one. Although I do like both. So
yeah, I think I'm there too. The one question mark I have on the Eagles is Miles Sanders, because I've been working this whole year under the assumption of they will use Miles Sanders more in high leverage games, because they had at one point this year. They had been bumping up his usage in bigger games, including this game against the Giants in week 14 or whatever it was, the one where he went absolutely bananas. But then you look at some of the other games, his snap rate was, I would say, underwhelming down the stretch. And it was a question of, okay, are they conserving him for the playoffs, or is he just not as valuable as I thought he was? I think specifically the big one was a Dallas game, 53.6% snap rate. There was no Hurts in that game, so you'd think maybe they want to lean more on Sanders to keep the offense more efficient. He did have 21 carries. That's good. That was tied for second most for him this year. It was his most in a game with Boston Scott active. So I love the matchup for Sanders. I love how efficient he is on the touches he does get. I just don't know, like I'm talking about bumping up projections for McCaffrey, for Pollard. I don't know if I could do that with Sanders. Where do you come down on him specifically?
So I'm going to ask you this, because for me, I think he's oversalaried based on the range, like the sort of median expectations. But sometimes when I bring this up, because like I know what Miles Sanders' ceiling is, right? And I say, well, I think the floor is really low because he could have a 45% snap rate, get mixed out in the red zone for whoever else they want to bring in. For me, I don't really see him being worth a $7,200 salary, despite knowing that the ceiling is 100 plus rushing yards, maybe multiple touchdowns. So I feel like this is one of those spots where I know how I feel about it, but would you say that the ceiling is worth chasing because his ceiling is, we think Jerick McKinnon has like a big in-game single game ceiling. ETN has it, but like Miles Sanders has that. Why are you not looking at what his ceiling is?
The question is like, what are his odds of reaching that ceiling?
Yeah.
And I think that his odds of reaching that ceiling based on the way he might be used are a little bit lower. I think that if you are multi-entering, you need Miles Sanders. That's obvious. I can't go full fade because of that ceiling, but I also can't make him a conviction play because I don't have any conviction in saying that his role will increase. I'm almost positive they will still use Kenneth Gainwell in 2-minute drills. There's that Boston Scott against the Giants narrative where he has like 43 touchdowns against the Giants in his career. Do they care about that? Probably not. But Nick Sirianni is a narrative guy. He was pumping stuff to AJ Brown. He was trying to beat the Colts down with no Frank Reich. Like, he's a narrative guy. So I would say if you have one lineup, he is firmly in that discussion because he can go for 150 and 2.
Didn't he have 144 and 2 against? Yeah, 144
Probably.
and 2 against them.
Yeah. So he can do that. And I think if I have one lineup, I prefer him over McKinnon because of that ceiling. I know it could go poorly, but he's just like, he is the toughest player for me to dissect / settle in on the entire 4-game slate, much less a 2-gamer.
Let me ask you this. Let's say we want to get some Miles Sanders. Would you pair him with Mahomes and like Kelsey and say, well, Jalen Hurts isn't going to have the rushing touchdowns. They're going to go to Miles Sanders. Maybe
I think I have to actually, because I'm not using Saquon in that lineup. So it's either him or McKinnon alongside ETN or Pacheco. And like, I'd rather go Sanders than those guys, I think.
Yeah. So I think like if you're playing Mahomes, it's like if you're playing Mahomes, you might want to play Miles Sanders.
Yeah, I agree. That's not Galaxy brain at all. I think that's correct. I think you're right. So like if it's a Mahomes lineup, Sanders is higher on my list. If it's a Hurts lineup, he's lower. That makes sense.
Yeah, bump him up because there's still a chance that like Hurts doesn't get the rushing touchdowns, but like Kenneth Gainwell does or something. And so you don't want to tie all of your like Mahomes and Kelsey to Sanders, but I think you would kind of those would correlate in terms of what it would take to like take down a GPP.
I agree. Let's talk about the Giants pass catchers here. Last week, I think we saw kind of what was expected. I was pleased to see Darius Slayton get a big role in that game because I had a lot of him. That drop sucked. But I think seeing Brian Daboll on the sideline, like consoling him, talking to him like, hey, we need you, stuff like that. That tells me we're not going to see a role change for Slayton. Because you will see that at times where a guy has a big fumble and their role changes. And they have a big drop, their role changes. I don't think we'll see that with Slayton, in part because who's going to replace him? Who they got in the chamber waiting to, I guess, didn't they sign James Washington? I don't care. Who cares? Anyway, last week, Slayton, 8 overall targets, 3 deep targets, 1 in the red zone. Isaiah Hodgins, 9 overall, 1 deep, 3 in the red zone. Richie James, 6 overall, none deep, 1 in the red zone. I think that Hodgins is legitimately good at football. I think the Eagles also think that. And I think as a result, probably going to get a lot of attention. So I think that Slayton at $1,000 lower in salary is a priority play on the slate. I would like to get to Hodgins. I think he's great, very good football player, but I think that I'm okay taking the discount on Slayton. I think people will do the same based on what you showed with optimizers. Slayton was in a lot of them, justifiably. Does the concern around roster rate scare you to the point where you will deviate from Darius Slayton?
Well, I don't know where to go unless it's just a Kadarius Toney. Which I don't
have both in the same lineup, so
which I don't dislike, but I'm gonna have both in a lot of lineups. I think
the Darius slap. Darius.
I think you could look. It's one of those. Slayton is one of the best process plays on the slate at salary. That much we're admitting, but he's a wide receiver. He, has a high ADOT. He could get 8 targets. I mean, he had 8 targets, 4 catches, 88 yards. So, good game last week. But if he has 3 catches, 42 yards on those 8 targets, like that's exactly what you're looking for in a fade. So it's not a full fade or a full, like I'm definitely not locking him in. I'm more likely to lock in Kadarius Toney, which is weird because I've seen it from Slayton.
Sure.
95% route rate last week. I have Saquon at 95% of the routes as well. I didn't even notice that until just now. Hodgins at 100%. Richie James at 66%.
Yeah.
Um,
Because they used more Lawrence Cager. So they had
he's,
more two tight end sets with him and Bellinger. And I think
yeah, he
that
was
was
at
why James got
32%.
squeezed.
Yeah. So, look, Slayton's a great play. I will still very much consider him in like a single entry. I probably want to be overweight on him because I think the role is even better than like what the production was last week. But
Yeah.
you can only do so much, and you don't want to fade very good process plays
Yeah.
outright just to be different. But I'm also not going to like yell at anyone for fading Darius Slayton. Like,
No.
we get it.
If you're concerned about Darius Slay on Darius Slayton, going back to week 14, that was before Hodgins really broke out. But in that game, only 8 routes for Slay versus Slayton versus 9 for Avonte Maddox. James Bradbury, 5 routes for Darius Slayton, whereas Hodgins saw a good amount of James Bradbury. So I feel like with how well Hodgins is playing, I think that the Eagles would prioritize shutting down Hodgins versus Slayton. And I don't disagree. I think that's probably a fine strategy. But I think that allows me to feel better about Slayton as well in that regard.
Any Bellinger, and if you're building 10 lineups, how many of them have Daniel Jones in them?
So no Bellinger because we actually have 3 good tight ends in this slate.
Yeah.
So I'd rather use one of the good ones.
That's a risk.
Ingram, Goddard, Kelsey. You're betting against all 3, and I don't want to do that personally. So no for me there. 5-10 lineups. I would say
you can do 100 if it makes it easier, but
no.
Yeah.
5 Hurts, 4 Mahomes, 1 Dimes.
I can get on board with that.
Yeah. I mean, the reason you would use a player is because you need to make sure they have a ceiling to match Mahomes and Hurts, but Jones has that with his rushing.
It is really strange that he's doing what he's doing on the ground and like scoring a lot of FanDuel points, but is the lowest salaried quarterback of the slate.
It is. And that makes it easy to get Kelsey and Saquon if you want to go Daniel Jones.
Like, if you think Daniel Jones puts up 25 and that Mahomes and Hurts don't get like 40, he's going to be the best play because of what he does for the rest of your lineup. But
you go Daniel Jones with Saquon Barkley, Travis Kelsey, Travis Etienne, Chiefs defense. You got 62.75 left. Put in Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney, the key value plays. 6,800 left for 2 slots, a receiver and a flex. It's not bad. So he makes Saquon Kelsey pretty easy to get to. So maybe I should go 2 Danny Dimes and then 4 of each for Mahomes and Hurts. Is that stupid?
no, I like that.
Okay.
Final thing, at least for me, for the slate, are you open to receiver at flex, tight end at flex? Yeah.
Okay. Because if you think about the receivers around 6,000, I'm probably already going to have Darius Slayton and Kadarius Toney in my lineup. So if I take them out, guys around 6,000, it's Richie James, Evan Ingram, Marvin Jones down there. I'd prefer Ingram over James. I prefer Ingram over Marvin Jones. So realistically, if I'm in that range, I'm just going to go Ingram. So I think I'm receptive to Evan Ingram, specifically being the flex, assuming that Goddard or Kelsey is already in there. So yeah. What about you?
Yeah, definitely. Because running back's not great enough.
Yeah.
Especially in the lineups where you're fading Saquon. I don't want 3 of like the other guys in there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Okay, let's move now to the Sunday slate and talk about the Bengals at the Bills. Bills banger coming up on Sunday. The Bills are 5.5-point favorites. Total is 48.5. And the reason that the Bills are 5.5-point favorites is the Bengals offensive line is beat up. Neither Jonah Williams nor Alex Kappa practiced on Wednesday for the Bengals. Both are expected to sit out this game. Williams did play through a dislocated kneecap earlier on this year, but that's tough to do it twice in 1 year. I think it's different knees, but that also doesn't seem fun. Isaiah McKenzie practiced in full. He said that he will be good to go this week. So Bills healthy, Bengals not. Brandon, what do you see as the overview of this game?
It's basically the Travis Kelsey discussion all over again, but with Josh Allen and how high we are on Josh Allen, if we think anyone else can match him. how much of a priority he is. I know we have Joe Burrow on the slate at $1,000 lower in salary at 8,000. Dak Prescott showing the ceiling that you and I have been banking on for
Not when
millennia.
I
It feels
used
like,
him.
yeah, we've been in on Dak forever and weren't quite there. I mean, it was the Monday night game, and then Brock Purdy is Brock Purdy. So like the odds that Josh Allen puts a flamethrower to the slate, very real.
I think the question is, how do you think Burrow does?
Right.
Because if you think that Burrow can overcome his offensive line injuries, he is the one guy who can flirt with Josh Allen on this slate. And I have a lot of faith in Joe Burrow, so I think yes, he can.
I think he can. I think he can also take 9 sacks.
Maybe, but again, it's not really about floor. So I think for me, if I have 10 lineups, I'm going 7 Josh Allen, 3 Joe Burrow, 0 Dak, 0 Purdy.
I'd be fine with that. I don't know if that second game is the game that you go to for quarterback. I think maybe Dak. Well, I don't know because people don't like Dak.
Yeah.
But now he's coming off a big game. I don't know what that'll do. But
And I just think in terms of upside and median projection, both those guys are well above the other two. I think the bigger question is, where is Allen compared to Hurts and Mahomes for the 4-game slate? Because I think I would go with both Mahomes and Hurts over Josh Allen. I'm not sure if that's dumb, but that's the way I feel about it. What do you think about Allen compared to those two guys?
I mean, my range of outcome sims do have, once you account for like salary and everything, does have Mahomes, Hurts, then Allen.
Okay.
I can see the case
do you
for
agree
it.
with
those? Yeah, I think like playoff Mahomes is he's I don't know if this is actually statistically the case, but more willing to run, and he's a good runner.
He's at 5 rush attempts per game in the postseason and 3.7 during the regular season.
Love it.
I looked this up like a week ago.
He has the 4 or 5 touchdown, like passing touchdown upside. Like there's no cap on his passing yardage upside, and I don't know how this like Bengals Buffalo game is going to go from a sort of emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
So I could see this one being like each team hangs 42 on the board, or things just aren't clicking. And I don't have that fear with like the other 2 games.
Yeah. If I look at my numbers for this slate, so I like the under in this game. I took the under when it was at 50.5, in part because of weather. The weather has since gotten better. Wind speeds went down like 10 miles per hour after I bet it. Whoops. I have Kansas City at 29.6 for their implied total. I have Philly at 27.9, Buffalo 24.1, in part because I view this as being a tighter spread because I like the Bengals, and because I like the under. So that's part of also why I like Allen a bit less. So to me, I would go Hurts 1, Mahomes 2, Allen 3 for the 4-game slate.
I'm not going to push back on that at all.
Okay. Let's talk about the rest of this game then. And I think that it kind of comes down to how competitive you expect the Bengals to be in this one, because we've seen them be efficient even when they haven't had Jamar Chase, even when T. Higgins has missed, gone out during the game. That's why I feel like they can be very competitive during this game, which is why I like Joe Burrow and willing to use him on the 2-game slate. Probably not in the 4-gamer, but on the 2-game slate, I'll use him. And it's why I freaking love T. Higgins. T. Higgins' salary is $7,000. If we look at the games, where is the split? 9 games with everyone healthy, which means Chase, Hayden Hurst, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, all 4 of those guys healthy. In that time, Chase has a 28% target share, which is sick. T. Higgins, 22%, very good. T has a 33% deep share versus 37% for Jamar Chase. Chase, 29% inside the red zone. So that's why I should like Jamar Chase too. But T. Higgins also grades out really well with his salary down to $7,000. So I love T. Higgins. I think that on the Sunday only slate, he is He and Debo Samuel, probably my two favorite receivers relative to salary. Where are you on Higgins and the rest of this Bengals offense?
I have Debo higher than T personally. But yeah, T last week, 92% of the routes, behind Tyler Boyd at 94%. Boyd's salary is 56, just kind of flagging that. Not going to get like the same target per route rate, anything like that compared to T Higgins. But if you're open to playing Joe Burrow, I think you should at least be taking a look at Tyler Boyd. I see Hayden Hurst and like a lot of optimizers too, even in two tight end, uh, optimizer lineups. 86% route rate last week. So between those two, we have T Higgins. I again could be emotional for T to a degree, but
Yeah.
I think that maybe at the salary, he is still a priority play for me. But in the context of the whole slate, there's a lot of receivers in play. So I think that also bumps him back down to like, I don't know if he's going to be someone that I try to plug in first and foremost,
Sure.
despite loving the process to get me onto T Higgins.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. Where do you view Jamar Chase compared to Stephon Diggs in this game? Diggs salary $8,200, Jamar Chase 85.
I have Diggs over Chase by just a little tick.
Okay.
But boy, it's hard to dislike anything you saw from Jamar Chase last week. 38% target share, 47% air yard share, 97% of the routes is as expected. But for Diggs, just higher offensive expectations, gets a lot of good leverage. Seems like he's coming alive down the stretch. It almost seems like we talked at certain degrees of like players we think might get extended in the playoffs. It almost feels like that with Diggs. It was like he was the guy that they just like lean on, and everyone else. I know we love Gabe Davis. I can't remember where I saw this on Twitter, but it was just like a comment of how they're bringing in guys off the street and like they're getting work. It does, to a degree, lower me on Davis a tick, but not really. It's just kind of like I don't want to get overexposed to the tertiary and quaternary options here. So that kind of bumps me up on Diggs. I feel like there may be fewer routes to go with the Bills and the Bengals, which seems weird to say.
The counterpoint on the guys off the street thing is that the guys off the street were getting targets over like Khalil Shakir.
Yeah.
Davis had 9 targets last week.
Oh, yeah.
13 yards. So I think the bigger point against Gabe is that Isaiah McKenzie is back. I think that hurts him. But even in the split, if we look at week 6 to 18, where they had McKenzie healthy, no Jamison Crowder and guys like that, in that time, Davis a 21% target share, Diggs 29%, 33% deep for Gabe, 35% deep for Diggs, 25% in the red zone for Davis, 23% for Diggs. So honestly, it's very similar to the Jamar Chase T Higgins split. I think though, with McKenzie being back and Gabe coming off a big game, whereas T is not, I prefer T over Gabe. I think that the assumption of increased roster rates for Gabe is what pushes me towards T, because I don't think T will be as popular this week.
Yeah, and I wasn't really trying to talk down on Gabe. It was more like Diggs he's their number one. I know people like to joke that like Gabe Davis wide receiver 1 next season, like in fantasy football. But it does feel a lot more dispersed beyond that. And if that ever bleeds into like Gabe Davis, but again, it's offensive expectations. So I'm not going to fight anyone on T versus Gabe. I kind of have Gabe like a half tick higher than T, but
okay,
I'd rather get to T for differentiation purposes. So I'm with you on that.
So I have a lineup in front of me, which is $100 off from being viable, and it has both Gabe and T in it. I am more likely to lop off Gabe than T from that lineup. That's the way I reflect my sentiment towards them for this week. Let's talk here about the running backs on both sides. Last week, Joe Mixon didn't get a bump at all. He actually got a roll reduction against relative to Samaje Perine. And honestly, like Mixon didn't play that well in that game, so I don't think it was like off base to do that either. On the Bills side, James Cook seemed like he got work early on, but Devin Singletary did eventually pull away. and have a lead in the backfield. So even though James Cook scored, my sentiment towards him lowered a bit in that game, especially because once that game got close is when they really leaned on Singletary. I think they just trust Singletary more. That could be like a feel-based narrative-y thing. I don't want to use either, really. Realistically, I'll probably have to, and I'd prefer Singletary over James Cook. Thoughts on them, and then thoughts on Mixon for the Bengals.
Yeah, don't really like I don't like any running backs in this game as priorities.
I agree. I think that there are two in the next game that are priorities, the priorities of all priorities.
Yeah. I'm trying to look up first half snaps last week. So James Cook 28%, Singletary 62%, Mixon 47%, Pirine 53%.
Yeah. It was 55.6% overall for Singletary in that Dolphins game.
Yeah, don't really love any of those, but I don't know how you don't have Singletary above Cook pretty comfortably there.
I like Cook more, but like I think I have to have Singletary higher.
It's one of those spots where I'm not going to say this is not exact, but like classic Tony Pollard versus Zeke. It's like we might want Pollard to have a better role, but if he doesn't, he doesn't. Right. That's obviously not the case for this game that we'll talk about next, but like it's no longer the case. But Singletary is the better play. And I'll have some by sort of. I don't know if there's really a necessity if I just go with McCaffrey and Pollard together, and I don't have to play a third running back on the slate if I don't want to. But for Mixon, I don't really see the case even from like an upside differentiation standpoint.
Yeah,
the role's not good enough for that unless he comes out with like a Jamal Williams sort of line where it's like 2 touchdowns on the goal line, taking away all the value from the rest of the players. But are you any interest in Samaje Perine?
No.
Okay.
Definitely not. You? I prefer Eli Mitchell over him.
I don't hate it.
I do.
From a correlation standpoint, if I play like a lot of Bills and think they get out ahead.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I think you get the thought process. The thought process is not bad.
Yeah.
But
I probably
in the game since Mixon came back, he's at 19 yards per game. 19 yards in scrimmage per game. It's really bad. They've won all those.
19 routes for him, 8 routes for Mixon last game.
That more so turns me off of Mixon than puts me on Samaje Perine.
Yeah.
Tight ends in this game, I think both of these are the 2 best tight ends in the slate relative to salary, which sounds really bad considering that it's George Kittle and Dalton Schultz in the late game. But Knox's salary is 58. Hurst's salary is 5,000. On these shorter slates, I often just tie my tight end to the quarterback, and I'm more likely to use. I'm only going to use Allen and Burrow. That's why I wind up on those 2 guys. So I'm just going to let quarterback dictate where I go here. I'm okay with Allen with Hurst. If I need to say salary, that's fine. But I think that's the way I'll play it here. What about for you with those 2 guys specifically?
Yeah, same here. Plus, I need salary to get to McCaffrey. He's a much bigger priority than the tight end. So Dalton Schultz taking advantage of like good matchup last week.
It's a horrible matchup this week. Like Fred Warner creates a black hole in the middle of the field. One Eye Jack Productions on YouTube says I turned in my Gabe the Babe fan card. A, you're right. B, thank you for saying Gabe the Babe and not Big Game Gabe, which Tony Romo said 16,000 times last week. So One Eye Jack, thank you in both regards for respecting Gabe the Babe's proper nickname. Any final thoughts for you on Bills versus Bengals?
I think we covered it.
Okay. Let's move now to the Cowboys at the 49ers, where we have the 49ers as 3.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 45.5. Injuries here, I got nothing. Both these teams pretty healthy. The one thing I would note on the injury report was an absence. The absence of Christian McCaffrey. He practiced in full on a Wednesday for the first time since week 12. That was pre-Thanksgiving, I believe. It's been a minute, and he was in full. And that's not why he, to me, is a headliner of this game. He is a headliner of this 2-game slate. He is the headliner and the biggest priority of the 4-game slate. And I want to start off the discussion with Christian McCaffrey, Brandon. how much of a priority is he for you across these various slates?
He is very much a priority. 73% snap rate in the wild card round, 15 carries, 119 yards, 2 targets, but 25 routes. I think we might see the note that like Elijah Mitchell had 3 targets, but he ran 4 routes. So high variance there for him to get that number. But 90% snap rate in the first half. His first half snap rates are like off the charts. If there's ever a game where it's like close throughout, I was a little bit worried about Elijah Mitchell taking some work. And in the end, he did, because it was, again, like they didn't have to run McCaffrey into the ground. But if you think this game stays close, Christian McCaffrey should play like, I said that Christian McCaffrey should have like a Travis Etienne-esque, like 90% snap rate, but that's very disrespectful to Christian McCaffrey. He's just a great play, and there's no way that he's scripted out. And there's also like really no way that he doesn't get yardage. The touchdowns might not come, but there's only so much we can do there. But yeah,
You can pay off without him.
McCaffrey an absolute priority. But then that begs the question: do you prioritize Christian McCaffrey or Josh Allen if you can only kind of build around one? It's not as hard to do both, but like
you can do both.
But like, who's a bigger priority for you?
McCaffrey. I'd rather go Burrow with McCaffrey than Allen without McCaffrey, personally.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I agree.
Part of the reason why I would say that is that my favorite stat for this weekend is there have been 7 games this year where McCaffrey has had 2/3 of the snaps with San Francisco. So you mentioned the 73% snap rate. Last week, it was 90% in the first half. If we assume he has 2/3 of snaps this week, here are his rushing plus receiving yardage totals in those games: 149, 146, 153, 138, 58, 193, 136. That's why I say he could pay off without a touchdown.
Wait, was there a 58 in there, or did you correct
58.
one? Okay.
No, 58. Yeah, he had 58 in one of the, I don't know which game, but
yeah, I didn't know if you were correcting 138 to 58.
It was
how I would have done it by screwing it up. So
no, it was actually 58. But he's averaged 139 with a 58 in there. He's had less than 136 once.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And I think the Cowboys will be competitive in this game. I think the spread of 3.5 is appropriate. I think that's about where it should be. So that to me says it'll stay close. That to me says Christian McCaffrey will go bananas. That to me says Christian McCaffrey across every player, across every slate on this weekend is the biggest priority. And I think the fact that I can get to him with a high salary quarterback makes it even easier to do so. And part of the reason why I have faith in getting to McCaffrey with Josh Allen in this slate is the presence of T.Y. Hilton. I want to talk about him quickly here. T.Y. Hilton's salary is $5,000. We'll talk about Pollard in a second. But T.Y. Hilton's salary is $5,000. Last week, Hilton ran a route on half the dropbacks, but it was 67% in the first half. He had 4 targets on 17 routes. So if that game stays more competitive and they're not run blocking, I think T.Y. Hilton's snap rate is probably a bit higher than what it wound up being. And that's enticing because he's at 2.9 yards per route run on the entire season, which is actually higher than CeeDee Lamb. That's not sustainable. That won't stick. But like when he's out there, he's getting work. He's earning targets. He looks pretty good. So T.Y. Hilton's salary is $5,000 on Sunday. I think using him to get to Allen plus McCaffrey and Pollard is very viable. Are you willing to use T.Y. Hilton as a kind of a punt play this weekend?
I sure am. You mentioned the 50% route rate, 24% target per route rate, which is a pretty solid number for a role player. Good ADOT, good like leverage with the team for another week. I don't have like super high expectations, but it's another one of the spots where if you can make a viable case for someone at a $5,000 salary on a 2-game slate, look, he might bust. I don't want to say probably will bust, but the chance that he has a huge game, pretty limited.
Yeah.
But for what he opens up without just being a complete throwaway, I think that he's a standout at salary.
Yeah.
So
T.Y. Hilton or Michael Gallup? Gallup is $5,700. What?
Gallup.
By how much?
A decent amount. 85% route rate for him last week. I know like the
I'm
2 target
somewhat
difference,
willing
but
to take the discount personally. Hilton or Kyler Boyd?
Boyd.
By how much?
If I have 5,700 left, I'm not going T.Y. Hilton over
Sure.
Gallup.
No, I mean like accounting for salary though.
I know. I'm saying like
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
not enough where I'm like, well, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that he's just undersalaried to that degree.
Okay.
At salary,
Final one: T.Y. Hilton, Juwan Jennings, or Isaiah McKenzie.
I want to go Jawan Jennings just because I do like the role from him, but I'll go Hilton.
I agree. In the games, the 6 games with Debo and McCaffrey. Jennings 4 targets per game. That's not bad for 51. 0.8 deep targets, 0.5 red zone targets. Like you said, the role is not bad, but I prefer Hilton
Yeah.
personally over him.
It's kind
Let's
of a
move.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Never mind.
What?
No, good. Let's move on.
He has more targets than George Kittle in that sample. Anyway, let's talk about Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard's salary is $7,100 in this slate. Last week, Pollard had a 58% snap rate. That's not going to set off any alarm bells, but that's actually his highest snap rate in a game with Zeke this year. He got used a decent amount, but not enough where projection systems will move on him heavily. Not enough where he'll get a lot of looks, I don't think, from a roster rate perspective, like not a ton at least. He had 89 yards in scrimmage, 10.4 FanDuel points with no touchdown. He has not scored since the Houston game, which was on December 11th. So I think Pollard and McCaffrey, to me, are the 2 biggest locks in this slate, regardless of position, regardless of salary. What about for you? Where are you at on Pollard?
Yeah, he should have scored last week.
You mentioned him at plus 185. I got him at plus 190. Ryan talked about plus 190 on the Monday show too. It was I also had 71.5 rushing plus receiving, so that helped, but I was sad. Yeah.
Should have scored. But yeah, Pollard, fantastic play. As you mentioned, 58% snap rate at the end of the game. Ezekiel Elliott ended at 48%, but they were both at 51% in the first half. So either they wanted to like limit Zeke, they didn't think that they needed to like give Zeke enough work, or they saw enough from Pollard that they scaled him up. I would have to think that, they trail in this game and Pollard gets, a lot more routes, a lot more targets than Zeke long term. It's kind of similar last week, but I don't think that that's really relevant. So
I also think the matchup favors Pollard because the 49ers rush defense has allowed a 35% success rate up the gut versus 43% to the outside. That's pretty universal. Most teams are better up the gut than on outside runs. Negative 0.07 rushing net expected points per carry versus 0.000 up the onto the outside. And if we look at the Cowboys since Zeke's return in the games that Pollard has played, Pollard's rush share increases to 40% from 35% when they go outside. Zeke's even at 41% on runs to the outside, but he's at 47% up the middle. So if they decide to run more horizontally, I had to think of the word, run more horizontally to account for the matchup, that also favors Tony Pollard. So I think a lot of stuff does favor him as being a priority for this slate. Let's talk here about the non-Juwan Jennings pass catchers on the 49ers. I have the sample being 6 games with Debo McCaffrey. In that sample, Debo's at 7.7 targets per game, 0.5 deep and 0.7 in the red zone. Like, not a lot of deep work, but also his rushing is not factored in there either. So I think that Debo, as mentioned, is the best receiver play on this slate. You said you have more T. Higgins, which implies to me he's probably your number 1 as well. Is that correct?
Number 1 on the slate?
Yeah. At receiver.
I mean, I have like tiers and I have like Diggs and Jamar.
But like relative to salary.
Right. I don't have it. Okay. I don't have it broken down quite like that, but
okay.
I'm most likely to have Debo of any receiver because of the salary. So he's probably effectively my number 1 there. I think that the rushing is still going to be there to some degree, high leverage work. And frankly, look, George Kittle's been scoring a lot. He just has not been getting a ton of work. And I think it's pretty clear that with what Debo has been doing since he's been back, he is a very integral part of what this offense wants to be and do. So I'm in on Debo.
Yeah. And it wasn't just big plays from Debo last week. He had 9 targets in that game, got some rushing attempts as well. He wasn't dependent on his point total on FanDuel is because of big plays, but his usage was also very good, especially for a guy at 71. So I mentioned that I have T second behind Debo. I think it's a full tier difference though, between them. So Debo 1, tier 1, T Higgins tier 2, but in second, and then Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs in that same tier as T for me. What about Ayuk? His salary is 65. I think we're both lower on Kittle as a result of the volume, result of the salary. Where do you come in Brandon Ayuk at 65?
Yeah, 97% of the routes last week, not really surprising. Good ADOT for him last week specifically.
Purdy was chucking it deep. It was because of like guys were schemed open and stuff like that, but like he was willing to chuck it, which is good.
Yeah, so I don't want to overlook Ayuk just because I'm not playing like Brock Purdy at quarterback. And I think he's very easy to overlook with like Gabe right there, T Debo right in that range. Not exactly, but close enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't fear like the blow up game, but I think that Ayuk, unless he catches the like he and Gabe get the I can't get up to T Higgins, but I'm not going to go down to Michael Gallup. I'll just plug in one of these two kind of bump.
Yeah.
I think he'll probably be a little bit under rostered relative to where he should be I think he has like an okay ceiling for a 2-game slate. So
yeah, for sure.
Not a priority, but he's a tier 2 play for me.
Like you pull up Sunday night, games are done. You pull up the whatever, tournament you were in. You pull up and look at the winning lineup. You see Brandon Ayuk in there. You're probably not surprised. I think that's fair. And I mentioned that lineup that I have where it's $100 over salaried. I can jump down from Gabe Davis to Ayuk and make that work. I'm fine with that. Yeah. I think that's totally okay. Prefer Gabe. Don't get me wrong. I'm not turning in my Gabe the Babe card yet, but I can make that constellation if it gets me Josh Allen, McCaffrey, Pollard, T, Debo. I can do that. So I probably will.
So because George Kittle requires such a, you're not going to like fall your way into 7,100 left and just plug in a tight end. Are you going out of your way to build George Kittle lineups? If you have 10, how many have Kittle? Any?
So let me see here. Okay, let me do this quick. I'd have to use Joe Burrow. I know that. So Burrow, and then we'll go Pollard and McCaffrey because I'm not prioritizing Kittle over them. And then let's go Kittle at tight end. And for this lineup, we'll go with the 40. Well, let's go Bengals defense, I guess, to really save salary. 6,300 left for all 3 wide receivers in a flex. It's not easy. And that also is burning one of my Burrow lineups, and I don't have a lot. Mm-hmm. So probably not prioritizing Kittle.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. I want to make sure. He's a great player. He's so fun to watch. But that salary for his usage is tough to get to. I know he's very good in the usage he gets, but it's tough.
And like you could make the same exact case. George Kittle's ceiling relative to the other tight ends on the slate, possibly larger than like what Kelsey has over like other viable tight ends.
Yeah, because Goddard's there. Yeah,
because like Goddard, Ingram has like a ceiling. Despite that, I don't think that the odds he hits it is quite high because I don't anticipate the game flow to lead to George Kittle getting 8 targets. I don't even know how many dropbacks they'd have to have for him to get 8 targets. And I'm never really going to bank on 4 targets and 2 touchdowns from a player at that salary.
I do the same lineup, but with Dalton Schultz instead of George Kittle. I've got 64.75 left. I can still get to T Higgins. I probably need T.Y. Hilton. Let's go Debo, and let's go Hilton in that lineup. And that means I can get to Gabe too. It's actually not a bad lineup. I think I'm more likely to use Dalton Schultz than George Kittle. As offensive as that is, as rude as that is, as disrespectful as that is, I think I'm more likely to use Dalton Schultz than George Kittle. What's your read on him at $6,400?
Yeah, Schultz. So I noticed that the Bucs allowed a really high catch rate over expectation to tight ends, so I got on him like in some props. Mm-hmm. For this past week, San Francisco not as bad. by any means. You have me a little bit worried because of like how much you're talking up certain defenders. And to be honest, one of the things I don't really focus on is like individual defenders. I don't care. Um, like they're a good team by like catch rate and target rate and stuff, but not an outlier. So I think I'm higher on Schultz than you are.
Yeah. Okay. It's like, so Fred Warner is a black hole in the middle of the field, and tight ends typically operate over the middle of the field. Schultz is more athletic, I think, which allows him to get outside some more times, but that's why I'd be more willing to use him than Kittle. But it is why I think I'm higher on Knox and Hurst on this slate, is because there's a black hole in the entire middle of the field.
Oh, wait. My numbers actually have no targets to tight ends
Ever.
because there's a black hole there.
Yes. Thank you. For once, the numbers back up my brain. I'm happy about this. Okay, let's talk about the Cowboys pass catchers, non-T.Y. Hilton version. CeeDee Lamb's salary is not bad at 78. The issue that I run into with him is that...
Well, the black hole.
No, because he works on the outside more. He's in the slot of
The black hole, I think... We got to learn about science, but I think a black hole is going to like draw stuff in from the outside.
No, this is not... Come on, read a book. I think the issue I have with Lamb is that if I'm getting Pollard and McCaffrey and then either Allen or Burrow, it's going to make it hard to get to Lamb. So as much as I love CeeDee Lamb's role, this year I think he's been underappreciated in how good his role has been. I think that is an accurate statement. I feel like I'll wind up being underweight on him. Where do you settle in on Lamb when you factor in his salary?
Yeah, when I factor in his salary, it's a little tough. The case I would make is like, well, if I like Pollard and I like Lamb, maybe I should be at least a little bit higher on Dak. And so if I'm playing Lamb with Dak, then that naturally saves some salary off of, both of them. I don't know how often I would do that. I know you said 7-3 Allen Burrow. I might try to get a Dak lineup in there.
Okay.
Because I think people won't really get there with the matchup being what it is. Again, it's hard to know exactly where this will shake out by Sunday. But again, if you look, Dak looked really good. I know the 49ers defense is great, but he looked good. And I don't think that I don't know if they were holding him back in terms of like volume, but
I don't think so. I think that it was just weird circumstances that led to like he's playing more high variance football this year, which I think is a good thing. Like it leads to picks, but like it's higher upside. So I don't. And they're also running him in the red zone again. That'd be a good pitch for using Dak. They did that a lot before he hurt his ankle. They're starting to do it again. So I don't think I'll get there on the 2-game slate, but I understand why you are considering it.
I think it's a way to be different without being completely dumb.
Yeah.
And then all you're saying is like, I think Josh Allen maybe gets under 30.
Yeah. Like you think he performs the way he did against the Dolphins, which is very well, but also not must-have territory.
Yeah. And again, you're kind of playing the angle that, look, one of the biggest mistakes people make is chasing passing volume for quarterbacks because like of blowouts and stuff. You needed the efficiency to be there, but whenever Dak has kind of been a little bit capped with like the pure upside, if he throws 40 times in this game, even if you adjust back for the efficiency of the defense, like I could see him getting 24 in like a peak game. And then if you
that could be enough on this slate. Sure.
So I don't think he's completely out of the picture. And that's the only way I think I'll play CeeDee Lamb though.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. Anything else for you in this game?
What about Eli Mitchell?
A bit lower on him than I was last week, in large part because I don't think I'll need to get there. Because part of the thesis behind playing him last week was because it would get you to McCaffrey. And now McCaffrey's salary is lower. So I don't think I need as desperately to use him. I think I would need to assume he'd have to be paired with the 49ers defense. Because I think I'd have to assume that it gets out of hand and the Cowboys just struggle. It would be no Pollard and with the 49ers defense, which is a build I probably won't do very often. But I could see it, but I just don't know if I'll get there.
Singletary, James Cook, Eli Mitchell, Samaje Perine. Rank them.
I would go with Singletary 1, James Cook 2, but not by a lot. Eli Mitchell 3. P-Ryan not a consideration.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I'm with you.
Okay, cool. All right, that's all we have for this game. Any final thoughts before we close up shop for the entirety of the divisional round?
I don't know. I think it's like we kind of there's like baseline assumptions of how this game will go based on like the betting lines. And despite the fact that we talked about like assuming that the Cowboys play from behind, it's actually like the tightest spread. But you know, if you think the Jaguars like play really well and like I don't know, I'm not gonna play Trevor Lawrence, but like I don't think anyone's really out of play at quarterback. I think that they're hard to justify plays, but look, they're both 2-game slates. Even on the 4-game slate, you can do whatever you want. But
yeah,
I think again, based on the start of the show, it's pretty obvious what the best sort of builds are, and then it's up to you from there how you want to differentiate.
Christian McCaffrey, no matter what, is my final thought for whatever slate you're playing.
Yeah.
Christian McCaffrey, no matter what.
Like
that is all that we have here for today on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. As mentioned, though, a lot of other good stuff going on here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio, UFC for Big Slates with Austin Swaim. We have PGA every Tuesday as well, all right here in the same feed. So go search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. We're back here once again next week to break down the conference championship games. We'll also have a show before the Super Bowl. So a lot of good stuff here still coming as the season winds down. We'll still be here talking NFL with all of you. Brandon, if people have any questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your lineups across all of the slates this weekend. Have a great time. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.